Here we go. Okay, folks, so today we're going to go over 7.5 and then look into a little bit of 7.6. 7.5, let's refresh our mind, how to do with the x factor. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to take the equation that we have, and the first one I'm going to look at is going to be a squared plus 16a plus 64. And if you have your note packet out, that is number 2. Remember with the x factor that we talked about, we cannot have a number in front of the variable to truly do the full x factor. So the a squared needs to have no number in front of it in order to make this work, the quick step, I should say, of this. So let's draw our x. Remember when we do the x factor that you have to take the 16 and put it in the top of the x. And then we put the last number, which is the 64, down below. Now, signs are very important, so please make sure you put your signs in. The 16 is positive and the 64 is positive. Now, the next step in this is going to be find out what factor. So remember, you're going to add to make positive 16, but you're going to multiply and make 64, or positive 64 in this case. So let's do it this way. Step 1 is figure out what two things multiply and make 64, but add and make 16. Do we have some volunteers that want to give me numbers? 8 and 8. So 8 times 8 gives me 64. Does it add and make 16? Yes. So we're going to go ahead and put this in. So if you know your multiple tables, this is going to go quite quickly. All right, the bigger the numbers, yeah, you may have to do a little bit of guess and check on that, but for the most part, if it's a basic ones, you should be able to know your multiples on these. So once we get that figured out, we're going to jump right into our answer. Yes, we can go right to the answer in this one. So since we have an a squared, we do the square root. Remember, the square root of that is take the exponent and divide it by 2. Well, half of a squared is going to be a. We put that at the beginning of each of our groupings to start us out with. Now go to the factors that we found to take and multiply and make 64, but then add and make 16. So they're both positive. So we put plus 8 and plus 8. Now, in the next lesson, which this carries over to, you will learn or discover that if the groupings are the exact same, then you write it as a quantity squared. So a plus 8 raised to the second, or quantity squared. And that is your final answer for this one. Let's look at another example. Let's say that we have u squared plus 3u minus 18. Now this one differs from the first one. The first one had all positive signs. The second one has a negative sign in it. And if you notice, it's located at the third term. That is really important because when we do our x factor, that means that my middle term will be positive 3, which is at the top, but my bottom is a negative 18. So what I'm saying essentially is I have two things that multiply and give me negative 18, but two things that then combine or add and make 3. So in this case, we have add above or combine, if you'd like to think of it that way, and the multiply. So what this really means when I have a negative in the back is that both of them have opposite signs. So that means I'm going to go ahead and put a plus here and a minus here. So that gives us a little bit of framework when we figure out our factors. So let's list some different ways to make 18. What do you got? 6 and 3. So 6 times 3, that multiplies and makes 18, correct? Does that have a difference of 3 when I subtract them? Yes, but we have to place the negative sign in a certain spot. So what do we have for the negative sign? Who gets to be negative? Negative 3. Good job. So we put the negative 3 there, so the 6 is positive here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the u in half. Remember, square root means we are cutting the exponent in half. So I put a u in the front of both of them. Now, just like we had before, I'm going to take them with their signs and put them in behind. So plus 6 and minus 3. So the raw form of the x factor has no number in front of the x squared, which is what I said at the beginning of this lesson. So the second part of this lesson is going to be the new part. The new part is showing you can use the x factor in a slightly altered form to do the same thing. So in our next lesson, which is 7.6, we're going to talk about putting a number in front of x squared. So if you turn to your 7.6 notes, let's look at some of them that we have here. Now, the first stage of any of these is going to be make sure that you copy them correctly, because I have to admit there are times in which I do miscopy. So the first one we have here is going to be 12g squared minus 37g plus 28. We are going to use the x factor, but the slightly altered form is going to be g, I have a 12 in the front of the g squared. So I drop down the negative 37, and instead of just putting 28, I have to multiply. So someone please multiply and give me what 12 times 28 is going to be. Someone check for me. What is 12 times 28? Yes, sir. 336. Okay, so this one is a very large number, and we know it's going to be positive because it has positive 12 times positive 28. So let's take and list our factors. Now, this is not a quick thing to do. If you notice, this is kind of a large number. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of write some possibilities off to the side. So this is where your numerology sense will come into. You see how we have 12 over here and 28 over here. So let's take and do a little bit of breaking this down. 12, let's just say, is 4 times 3. And let's say, for argument's purpose, that 28 is going to be 4 times 7. So if I want to make 37, I have to find two things that multiply out of those factors and make 336, and two things that add and make negative 37. So let's try to mix this up. If I have 4 times 4, that gives me 16, and 3 times 7, that gives me 21. Another possibility is, of course, we have our 12 and 28. And if we do it another way, we could have called this 2 and 6. So if we did it a different way, we could have made that 8 times 42. So here's my question. Is there a way that we can break this down and combine them by adding them? So this would be a negative and a negative out of what I have. Do I have one of them that lists and makes negative 37 when I combine their factors? Does anybody see one up there that adds and makes 37? Do we have one that we like? What about my first one? So we have the first one, correct. Now that you guys caught up a little bit, the first one is the one that's correct, because 16 times negative 21, the two of them negative, does give me 336, but it also adds and makes 37. So this is 16, and this is going to be 21. So once again, we're going to come over here. Now, we can't just jump right into our two groupings. This is where the difference runs into. So at this point, we're going to make a conscious decision. Now, here's where it's different. So everyone, please make sure that when you write this in, you draw an arrow over to show where you get your numbers. Now, before, we had the rectangle method in 7.2. We were on the outside multiplying, getting in, correct? In this case, we're going to be on the inside dividing to get out, or factoring to get out. So here's how this works. It's very simple. Put the very first term in that beginning trinomial in the upper left-hand corner, and take the last term, which is 28, and put it in the lower right. The middle is always a diagonal, correct? We combine those. So the two factors you found is what's going to go over there. So this is negative 16 and negative 21. Now, like I said, you're going to factor to get out. So let's work on the first row that we have here. What does 12 and 21 both have in common factor-wise? 3. So if I can pull a 3 out of both of them, then I know that we're going to have a factor left over. So 3 divided into 12 is 4, so that goes above. And 3 divided into 21 is 7, so it's going to be negative 7 since I have a negative 21. Now, the second part is very simple. We have the top factors we need. We need to get that bottom missing one, correct? So let's do the reverse. 4 times what gives me negative 16? What kind of 4? A negative 4. Excellent. So now this kind of checks it. Negative 4 times negative 7 gives me positive 28. So now we have all the correct numerical coefficients we need. You're saying, well, how does that help us? We have no g's in this, right? Well, if you recall from section 2, we took and had the g's at the beginning. So like we did before when we were foiling to get it in, we put the g's in the first terms. So my answer is 3g minus 4 and 4g minus 7. Let's do one more time. And by the way, you're going to hear this called as the umbrella. So umbrella is the name of this one. And the reason why is because if you look at it, it looks kind of like an umbrella when you multiply your first times your last. So they're calling this an umbrella method. So let's do one more of these. And then I will allow you to start looking ahead on your assignment if you are done with your current homework. So what we have here this time, let's do a little smaller. Let's say I have 15b squared plus 14b minus 8. So we're going to start off with the x factor like we did before. I have 14 up top, which is positive. Our first times our last is going to be what? Negative. What is 15 times negative 8? Okay, negative 120. Good job. So the next step that we're going to have here is say, okay, we have our top and our bottom filled out. Let's get our factors. If we look at this, we have a negative on bottom. So the two of them are going to multiply and make a negative, but combine and make a positive 14. So that means I'm going to have opposite signs again. So the sign you can still figure out by looking at the details. In this case, the negatives on bottom, meaning I need one of each. So off to the side, let's break this down. If this is 3 and 5, we can make this one 4 and 2. So let's look at the factors if we break them down. 3 times 4 is 12 times 5 times 2 is 10. Now remember, one of them is positive and one of them is negative. Since the plus is up top, that means the bigger one will be positive. So 12 minus 10 is only going to give me 2, so that's not going to work out right. Let's try another one. Let's try the 5 times the 4 and the 3 times the 2, which is going to give me 6. So in this case, we put the smaller one as a negative. So 20 minus 6 gives me 14, which is what we want, correct? So we know that 20 will be positive and the 6 will be negative because it gave us our desired outcome. Now we're ready to move into the rectangle. All right, so once again, let's fill in our rectangle. We know that we have 15 to start out with and negative 8. Please remember that if it's a subtraction sign, that actually means it's negative, so don't forget them. Put in our factors, so I have 20 as positive and negative 6 as my other terms. Ask yourself, what we're going to focus on factoring it. So we're going to ask ourselves, what can I take out of the top two? What do they have in common? A 5. So we put the 5 out front. Now we do the division to get the top. So 5 divided into 15 gives me 3. And 5 divided into 20 gives me, okay, excellent. Now we play our game. We want to fill this bottom one, so we ask ourselves, 3 times what gives me -6? A -2. And then we check it for good measure. -2 times 4, does that give me -8? And yes, it does. So all my factors are correct. So now we put our B's behind the first two and we rewrite our answer. So we have 5B minus 2 and 3B plus 4. Do we have any questions? Do we want to try one more on our own and then go through it? Okay, so let me put this on here and we'll pause the video and then you can take and get a moment to try it on your own, and then we will record what we see for the answer. So here's our next one, 5t squared plus 12t minus 9. Let's go into the x factor now. So we have the umbrella here, so remember that the 12 is positive, and we do the first times the last, which is going to be -45. Now, I've already heard you guys saying that you got 15 and 3, because 15 times 3 gives me 45, but it subtracts and is going to give me 12. So when we look at this, just make sure that you choose the correct multiple with the correct sign. We need a positive 12, so the 15 has to be the bigger one. So that means that the 3 will be the negative. Let's take and write this into our table. Now, once we get our factors, the table, remember, is just helping us go backwards into what our original two groupings are. So the first number we have is the 5, which is in the upper left. When you write the 9, don't forget the negative to go with it in the lower right. It doesn't matter which way you write this, so let's put the -3 on top and the 15 on bottom. Now you'll see why I did that in a moment, because you will stumble upon a couple of these. So when we look at this, remember we're looking at the top. So what does the top two have in common? Do they have anything in common? No, they don't. So if they have nothing in common, they have 1 in common. And remember, when we had groupings, we did have 1x occasionally as our beginning one. So this is a possibility. So 1 times what gives me 5? 5. 1 times what gives me -3? -3. Now ask yourself, what did you multiply 5 by to get 15? 3. And then we check our math on the last grouping. 3 times -3 gives me -9. So therefore, the process to get in matches how we got out. So remember, we put the t in this case instead of x behind each of the first ones. So 5t minus 3 and t plus 3 is our second grouping. All right. If you have any questions, we'll go back through the textbook and check out some new problems, or you can rewatch this video.